My name is Deele. I'm 34 years old, and for 6 years I sat in a glass-walled conference room at Hartwell & Crane, one of the oldest real estate development firms in the state of Connecticut, and wrote the contracts that made those men rich. Not helped write, not contributed to, wrote, drafted, negotiated, revised, filed, enforced. I wrote the acquisition agreement that locked in the Riverside Commons deal. 47 acres, $14.2 million. I wrote the joint venture contract that brought Sheffield Capital into the Northgate project. I wrote the non-disclosure provisions that kept 3 separate lawsuits out of court. I wrote the clause that saved the firm $800,000 in a contractor dispute in 2019, when everyone else said they'd have to pay. Not one of those documents had my name on it. I was the contract manager, not the attorney, not the partner, not the executive. I sat 2 floors below the people who signed the papers I wrote, in an office with no window and a heater that smelled like burning hair from October to April. My business card said Document Compliance Specialist, which is a title that sounds important until you realize it means you're the person everyone calls when they need something done and nobody wants to do it. I drove a 2009 Honda Civic. I brought lunch from home in a container my mother gave me when I moved out. I wore the same 3 blazers on rotation for 4 years because I couldn't justify spending money on clothes when I was paying off student loans with interest that felt like a second rent. The men I worked for wore Italian suits and drank whiskey at client dinners that cost more than my monthly take-home. They called me Marcus when they needed something. They called me the guy from documents when they were talking about me. They called me nothing when I wasn't in the room. I know because I heard them more than once, more than 100 times. Because in 6 years, nobody bothers to lower their voice around the person they've decided doesn't count. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because the story of how I ended up writing contracts for people who thought I was furniture, and what I did when I finally understood the full picture, that story starts somewhere they never would have guessed. It starts in a barber shop. Before you move on, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if this story earns it. Drop your city and your time in the comments. I want to know who's out there. Now let me take you back to where it started. Dunmore, Connecticut. Population 11,000. The kind of city that used to make things, brass fittings, clock parts, industrial components, and then stopped making things in 1989 and never really figured out what to do after that. 3 mill buildings converted into loft apartments nobody from Dunmore could afford. A main street with more vape shops than banks. A river that floods every spring. And a mayor who's been promising a new drainage system since 2011. I grew up on the east side, on Pratt Avenue. In a 2-family house my father rented the bottom unit of for 22 years. Same landlord, same address, same drafty windows every November. We paid that man $880 a month for 2 decades and never owned a single square foot of it. My father, Gerald Deele, cut hair for a living. He ran a one-chair barbershop on Dunmore Street for 31 years. Gerald's. That's what the sign said. Not Gerald's barbershop, not Gerald's fine grooming, just Gerald's. He painted the letters himself with a 1-inch brush the first spring he opened, and when the paint started peeling around year 15, he repainted them himself with the same brush, which he had washed and kept in a coffee can under the back counter. My father cut hair 6 days a week. He opened at 7:30 and closed when the last customer left, which was sometimes 7 at night. He charged $14 for a cut until 2008, then $16, then $18. He never went above $22, even when everyone else in the county went to $30 and beyond. He said his customers were working men, and working men shouldn't have to budget a haircut. His regulars drove 20-25 minutes out of their way rather than going somewhere closer. Not because of the price, because of Gerald. My father was the kind of man who remembered everything. He knew which of his customers had sick wives, which ones had sons who'd gotten into trouble, which ones were holding it together by a thread and needed someone to talk to for 20 minutes while getting a fade. He kept a jar of Tootsie Rolls on the counter because Mr. Antonelli, who was diabetic, couldn't eat them but liked to have one on the way out for his grandson, who waited in the car. He kept an extra phone charger behind the register because Mrs. Delaney's son, Jerome, always came in with a dead phone. His hands shook a little after he turned 55. He never told a customer. He just slowed down slightly, took more care, and every cut was still clean. My mother, Claudette, worked at the county records office for 26 years. She processed deed transfers, tax assessments, property filings, zoning applications. She knew the legal description of every parcel in Dunmore County better than any attorney in the county. She knew which properties had liens, which ones had contested boundaries, which ones had back taxes going back to the 1980s. She brought home $31,000 a year. She never once complained about the salary. She said it was steady and it was honest, and those were the two things that mattered. My parents weren't educated in the way the world likes to call educated. Neither of them went past a 2-year certificate program, but my father could do math in his head faster than a calculator, and my mother could read a legal description and explain it to you in plain language in 30 seconds flat. Between them, they made sure our house, the bottom unit we rented for 22 years, was clean, warm, stocked, and filled with the kind of quiet reliability that people who never had it don't know to miss until it's gone. I was their only child. I was not a remarkable student. I was good at reading and decent at arguing, and bad at sitting still. My 3rd grade teacher told my mother I was resistant to structure, which my mother took home and thought about, and then told me, "You're going to need to find work where you make the structure, because following other people's rules is going to drive you sideways. She was right. It took me until I was 27 to understand how right she was. I got through high school on determination and stubbornness more than talent. I went to Dunmore Community College for 2 years, transferred to Eastern Connecticut State on a partial grant, and finished a degree in business administration with a concentration in contract law and negotiation. A concentration I invented by talking my academic advisor into letting me combine courses from 3 separate departments. She gave me a look that said, "This is going to be a problem," but she signed the form. I graduated with $34,000 in student debt, a GPA of 3.4, and a job offer from Hartwell & Crane, which I found by cold emailing every real estate development company in the state of Connecticut for 6 weeks until one of them called me back. The man who called me back was Arthur Crane III, 48 years old at the time, 3rd generation Hartwell & Crane. He'd never not had money. His grandfather had founded the company. His father had expanded it. Arthur had, as far as I could determine, mostly presided over it and played golf 4 times a week at the Westbury Club. "You've got nerve, son," he said on the phone, cold emailing a firm like ours. I told him I had no connections and no inherited advantage, so I had to make noise. He liked that. He hired me at $41,000 a year to assist with document management. I moved into the office on Pratt Avenue with the burning hair heater and started work the following Monday. I thought I was starting a career. I was actually starting an education in how the world treats people who do the work, while others take the credit, and how long you can let that go on before the silence becomes its own kind of consent. The thing about being invisible in a company is that it teaches you a great deal about how the company actually functions, as opposed to how the company says it functions. What I learned in the first 6 months at Hartwell & Crane: the partners did not write the contracts. The attorneys of record reviewed contracts and signed off. But the actual drafting, the clause-by-clause construction, the protective language, the indemnification provisions, the reps and warranties, the conditions precedent, that was my job. From the very first week. I found this out on day 4 when Howard Milbank, the senior contracts attorney, called me into his office at 5:45 p.m. and slid a folder across the desk. "Acquisition agreement for the Linfield property," he said. "We need a first draft by Thursday." He looked at me the way people look at a new piece of equipment they're not sure will work. "Think you can manage that?" I told him yes. I went home that night, sat at the desk in my apartment, a second-hand writing desk my mother had kept in the spare room for years and given me when I moved, and I studied every acquisition agreement I could find, pulling model language from 3 different sources, then spent the next 2 days drafting a 48-page document that accounted for every contingency I could identify. Howard read it, changed 4 words, and presented it in the Thursday partner meeting as a solid draft from our team. I wasn't in the Thursday partner meeting. I was not in any partner meetings for the first 3 years. I was in my office with the burning heater, drafting the documents that people presented in those meetings. I wrote due diligence frameworks. I wrote option agreements. I wrote management contracts, ground leases, construction rider provisions. I wrote the memo that identified a title defect in the Meridian Plaza deal that saved the company from acquiring a $6 million liability they hadn't noticed. That memo had Howard's name on the cover. I want to be clear about what I'm describing, because I want you to understand this was not an accident of oversight or a systemic inefficiency that nobody noticed. It was a structure. It was deliberate and functional, and everyone above me understood it completely. The way it worked, I produced the work. Howard, or one of the junior partners, presented the work. The partners praised the work. The clients received the work. The deals closed. The commissions were paid. The bonuses were distributed among the people whose names were on the door and on the letterhead. My name was on the door to my own office, which had no window. For the first year and a half, I told myself this was how you paid dues. This is how you prove yourself. You put your head down. You do excellent work. You demonstrate your value, and eventually the people above you recognize it, and the title changes, and the credit follows. I was 24. I believed this the way young people believe things that have been explained to them by people who benefit from their believing it. By year 2, I had started keeping records, not because I was planning anything, not because I had a scheme or a strategy, but because I am my mother's child, and my mother processed records for 26 years, and she always said, if it matters, document it. If it doesn't need documenting, it doesn't matter. I kept a log, date, project, my specific contribution, who presented it, outcome. I kept copies of my drafts with original timestamps. I saved every email where someone forwarded my work up the chain without attribution. I built a folder structure on an external hard drive that I kept at home, not on the company server, and I updated it every Friday. By the end of year 2, that drive contained documentation of my work on 31 projects, ranging in complexity from simple lease amendments to a $22 million joint venture agreement. I want to stop here and tell you something about the moment I understood what I was actually dealing with, because there was a specific incident, a dinner, in the spring of my second year that made everything crystallize in a way it hadn't before. Hartwell and Crane had landed a major new client. A Boston-based private equity group called Meridian Ridge Capital was looking to deploy $40 million into Connecticut commercial real estate over 18 months, and they wanted a local partner who knew the market. This was the biggest client acquisition the firm had made in a decade. I knew about Meridian Ridge because I had spent 11 days writing the pitch document. Not the presentation slides, those were assembled by the marketing coordinator with direction from Arthur and Howard, but the substance, the market analysis, the risk framework, the proposed deal structures, the contract language demonstrating our approach to transactions of this scale. I had drafted the sample acquisition agreement included in the pitch package specifically to show Meridian Ridge that we had the legal sophistication to handle their volume and complexity. The pitch landed. Meridian Ridge signed a letter of intent. 2 weeks later, Hartwell and Crane held a client dinner at Whitmore's, a downtown restaurant where the prix menu started at $120 per person and the wine list had its own leather binding. I was not invited. I found out about the dinner the morning after, when I came in and found a handwritten thank you note on Arthur's desk. He'd left his office door open. From Meridian Ridge's managing director, thanking Arthur and Howard and the whole talented team for a wonderful evening. I stood in that hallway for a moment. Then I went to my office, closed the door, and opened my log. I found the entry from 11 days ago, the pitch document, the sample agreement, the 26-page risk framework I had built from scratch. The entry was there. The documentation was there. I was not at the dinner. I went back to work. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I wasn't a client-facing person, and this was simply how the division of labor worked. I told myself a lot of things that a person tells themselves when they are not ready to accept something they already know. Here is what I already knew. I was not invisible because I lacked ability. I was invisible because being visible would have cost the people above me something. Credit, status, the comfortable fiction that their expertise and relationships were the core value of the company, rather than the document work happening in the no-window office with the burning heater. Making me visible would have required giving me a seat at the table. And giving me a seat at the table, a kid from Pratt Avenue, whose father cut hair for $22, whose mother made $31,000 processing county records, was simply not something that Arthur Crane III or Howard Milbank had any intention of doing. Not because they disliked me, actually. I believe they liked me quite a bit, the way people like a reliable piece of equipment that never breaks down and asks for nothing. They thought I was content. I had never shown them I wasn't. That was partly my own fault, and I've made peace with it. But it was also the result of 6 years of careful, systematic discouragement so smoothly delivered that I hadn't noticed it as discouragement until year 4. Let me explain what I mean by that. Let me tell you about the promotions that didn't happen, the title change that was always one performance cycle away, and the raise that came in $4,000 under what I had specifically requested and was never explained. And then let me tell you about the conversation I overheard in the parking garage in March of my 5th year that changed every calculation I had made. March. Cold the way March is cold in Connecticut. Not the brutal cold of January, but a wet, sharp cold that gets under your coat and makes you feel like the winter is not ending so much as transforming into something slightly worse. I had stayed late. This was not unusual. I was finishing a revision to the Northgate Joint Venture Agreement, a document I had been working on for 3 weeks, which had been complicated by a last-minute change in the equity structure that required me to rebuild 4 sections from scratch. It was close to 9 p.m. I gathered my things, pulled on my coat, and took the elevator to the parking garage on the 2nd level. The elevator opened to a concrete landing above where the executive cars parked, and as I stepped out, I heard voices below me, slightly echoing of the low ceiling. Arthur and Howard. I recognized both voices immediately. They were walking toward their cars, voices low, but audible in the empty concrete space. I don't know why I stopped moving. Instinct, maybe. Or just the animal recognition that the tone of the conversation was not casual. I stood still on the landing above them. They couldn't see me. I wasn't hiding. I just stopped. Howard's voice first. Cortland's bringing his nephew in. Corporate transactions background. 3 years at Caldwell and Fitch. Arthur. What's the title? Howard. They're talking senior contracts counsel, which means we'd need to think about where Marcus fits in that picture. A pause. Arthur. Marcus is good. He's very good, actually. Howard. He's exceptional. That's exactly the problem. Silence for a moment. A car door opened and closed. Arthur's voice again, quieter. He doesn't have a law degree. Technically, everything he produces has to come through me or you for it to be legally defensible. That's the structure, Howard. That's the justification. The structure is that he does the work and we sign the work. The new hire isn't going to want to share credit with someone who doesn't have a JD. And frankly, Marcus has been here 5 years. If we formalize what he actually does, we have to pay him like what he actually does. Arthur, which is what, in your estimation? Howard, somewhere between $95,000 and $130,000, depending on how you classify the role. Arthur, we pay him $58,000. Howard, correct. Another pause. Footsteps on concrete, keys jingling. Arthur, almost to himself. Keep it the same. Structure stays the same. If Cortland's nephew asks, Marcus is document support. We'll give him the title of Contract Services Manager. Bump him to $61,000. He'll be pleased. Howard, he's not going to be pleased forever. Arthur, he'll be pleased long enough. A car engine started, then another, then tires on concrete, and silence. I stood on the landing above the empty parking spaces for a long time. $58,000 after 5 years. When Howard's estimation was that the market value for what I actually did was somewhere between $95,000 and $130,000. I had been producing $130,000 worth of work and collecting $58,000. The difference, call it $70,000 a year, times 5 years, represented a gap of $350,000 between what I had earned and what I had been paid. A gap that had funded, among other things, Arthur's golf membership at the Westbury Club and Howard's second home on the lake in New Hampshire. He'll be pleased long enough. I thought about my father painting his shop sign with a 1-inch brush. I thought about my mother at the kitchen table with a deed transfer and a yellow highlighter, explaining to me at age 12 what a title defect was. I thought about the jar of Tootsie Rolls my father kept for a diabetic man's grandson. I thought about the way my father washed his hands at the end of every workday. Methodical, thorough, soap under every nail. Not because the day was done, but because the next thing deserved clean hands. I walked to my car. I sat in it for 15 minutes in the cold garage. Then I drove home and called my father. "Dad," I said, "I need to tell you something, and then I need you to help me think." He said, "All right, go." I told him everything: the contracts, the documentation, the Meridian Ridge pitch, the dinner I wasn't invited to, the parking garage, the $58,000 versus the $130,000, the nephew coming in. He'll be pleased long enough. My father listened without interrupting for the entire 20 minutes it took me to say all of it. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Then he said, "Son, how long have you been keeping records?" 3 years, I told him. "And the records are accurate?" "Every document time-stamped, every email saved, every project logged." Another pause. I could hear the TV in the background on his end. The evening news. He always watched the evening news. "Here's the question," he said. "Not what you should do. What are you able to do? In terms of taking care of yourself afterward, I mean. Financially, legally, practically." I'd thought about this on the drive home. I had savings, 8 months of expenses, emergency fund, plus a brokerage account I'd been quietly contributing to for 3 years. I had no dependents. My apartment lease was month to month. I had professional connections, modest but real. A paralegal at a downtown firm who'd referred me work on the side. A commercial real estate broker who'd told me twice he'd put my name forward if the right thing came up. I had the records. "I think I can take care of myself," I said. "Then the question is just timing," he said, "and what you want the ending to look like." I drove to my parents' house the following Saturday, sat at the kitchen table, same one I'd done homework on my whole childhood. Same chairs, same yellow walls, and my mother laid out everything she knew about county property records and the documentation standards for legal disputes. My father made coffee. We talked for 4 hours. By the end of that Saturday, I had a plan. Not a dramatic one, not a scorched earth one. A clean, methodical, documented one. I was going to finish what I was working on. I was going to spend the next 3 to 6 months building something of my own. I was going to leave. But not quietly, not without a record, and not without making sure that the work I had done, the work that had funded those suits and that golf membership and that lake house, was properly and permanently attributed. I just needed one more piece. I needed them to show me, one final time, exactly what they thought I was. I didn't have to wait long. His name was Preston Vance. He arrived in late April, 29 years old, 3 years at Caldwell and Fitch in Hartford, a JD from the University of Connecticut School of Law, and an MBA from Quinnipiac. Preston was tall, well-dressed in the way of someone who'd grown up with money and considered it a background condition rather than an achievement. His father, Cortland Vance, had been Arthur's fraternity brother at Trinity College. That was the full extent of his qualification for the position. His title was Senior Contracts Counsel. His salary, which I learned through the administrative coordinator, who trusted me because I'd covered for her twice during difficult periods and never mentioned it, was $112,000 base plus a performance bonus target of 15%. I was at $58,000. We would soon be at $61,000 with the title of Contract Services Manager, as per Arthur's parking garage plan. Preston was assigned to the Northgate joint venture, the deal I had been working on for 3 weeks, the one I was finishing the night of the parking garage. He was assigned in the sense that Howard introduced him to the clients, included his name on the project team list, and scheduled him for the first client meeting. Preston attended that meeting. I attended it too because Howard said he might want my input on a few technical points. Preston sat at the table. I sat against the wall. At one point, the Northgate client, a man named Barry O'Say, very sharp, very thorough, asked a specific question about the mechanics of the equity waterfall provision in the joint venture agreement. How did it work exactly? And what happened in the scenario where a capital call wasn't met? Preston started answering. He got 3 sentences in and then stalled, slightly, in the way of someone who understands the concept abstractly but hasn't worked through the specific mechanics. I could see Barry O'Say notice the stall. His eyes moved, just briefly, to the side of the room where I was sitting. I spoke from my chair against the wall, walked through the equity waterfall provision step by step, explained the dilution mechanism for missed capital calls, explained the specific language I had drafted to protect the company's preferred return in that scenario, and answered Barry O'Say's follow-up question about what the clause would look like under an alternative structure. Barry O'Say looked at me. "That was your drafting?" "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly. He looked at Howard. "Is Marcus on the project team?" Howard said, very smoothly, "Marcus provides contract support across all our active projects. His expertise feeds into the work of the team." Barry O'Say looked at me again. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I looked at my notes, and the meeting continued. After the meeting, I went back to my office. I updated my log. I added the Northgate meeting, Barry O'Say's question, my response, Howard's framing of my role. I added one more note at the bottom of that entry. Barry O'Say noticed. File this. I was almost ready. 2 weeks after Preston's arrival, Arthur called me into his office for what he framed as a recognition conversation. His office was on the 4th floor. Corner office, 2 walls of windows overlooking downtown Dunmore. A view my office did not have. He had a credenza behind his desk with a row of framed photos. Arthur with clients, Arthur at charity galas, Arthur at the ribbon cutting for the Riverside Commons development. The development I had written the acquisition agreement for. I was not in any of the photos. Arthur told me that the company was restructuring the contracts function to reflect its growing portfolio, and that in recognition of my contributions over 5 years, they were promoting me to the newly created role of Contract Services Manager. He slid a letter across the desk. The raise was $3,000, from $58,000 to $61,000, effective the 1st of next month. He looked at me with an expression of generous expectation, the expression of a man conferring a gift. I looked at the letter for a long moment. Here is what I did not do. I did not say, I know about Preston's $112,000. I did not say anything about the parking garage. I did not produce my log or my external hard drive or 3 years of time-stamped documentation. I did not tell him what his senior partner had said about keeping me pleased long enough. I said, Arthur, I want to make sure I understand the scope of the new role. Will there be any change to how project attribution is structured? I'm thinking specifically about client-facing documentation, project team listings, that kind of thing. Arthur blinked once. The expression recalibrated slightly. Well, Marcus, attribution flows through the licensed professionals on the project team. That's a matter of legal liability as much as anything else. You understand. Of course, I said. And the $3,000 reflects the additional scope of the new title. It reflects our appreciation and our confidence in you going forward. I said, I appreciate that, and picked up the letter. He smiled. He thought the matter was resolved. He thought I was pleased. I was not pleased. I was finished. Not angry. Not shaking. I want to be precise about my emotional state in that moment because I think it matters. I was completely, irreversibly calm. The way my father was calm when someone didn't tip. The way my mother was calm when a supervisor took credit for her research. A stillness that comes from knowing exactly where you are, exactly where the exit is, and exactly what you are going to do before you walk through it. I went back to my office. I closed the door. I opened my laptop and wrote 2 emails. The first was to Barry Osei at Northgate. I had his direct contact from the project file. I thanked him for the meeting, noted I was following up on his equity waterfall question, and asked whether he might have 20 minutes for a call to discuss a few aspects of the documentation framework, as I was undergoing some professional transitions and wanted to ensure continuity. The second was to my father. 3 sentences. I'm ready. You were right about timing. Thank you for the Saturday. Then I went back to work on the Northgate agreement. I had documents to finish. I always finish what I start. I gave myself 30 days. 30 days to finish every active project in my queue at Hartwell and Crane. Not because I owed them my best work after the parking garage conversation, but because the work wasn't theirs. The work was mine. Every document had my judgment in it. Every clause reflected decisions I had made. Walking out mid-project would have meant handing incomplete work to Preston Vance, who would have damaged it, and the client, Barry Osei, the city of Dunmore on a pending municipal lease, 3 smaller residential developers I'd built relationships with over 5 years. Those clients would have suffered for my exit. I finished every document in my queue in 28 days. During those same 28 days, I did the following things on my own time. I registered an LLC, Deele Contract Services LLC, in the state of Connecticut. Cost me $120 and a Tuesday afternoon. I used my parents' address on Pratt Avenue for the registered agent because my apartment lease was month to month and I didn't know where I'd land. I had a 90-minute conversation with Barry Osei, who had called me back within 4 hours of my email. He wanted to know about continuity on the Northgate project. I explained that I was considering a professional transition. He asked me directly whether I would be available to continue the contract work on Northgate in an independent capacity. I said I would need to review the non-compete provisions in my employment agreement before I could answer that. He said, "Fair enough. When you've reviewed them, let me know." I reviewed my employment agreement that night. Non-solicitation of clients, valid for 12 months post-termination. Non-compete, broadly worded, prohibiting engagement in similar business activities for 12 months within a 50-mile radius. I sent both provisions to a labor attorney I'd found through the State Bar Referral Service. She reviewed them and called me the following evening. The non-solicitation provision was standard and would hold. The non-compete, however, was almost certainly unenforceable under Connecticut law as written. It was drafted too broadly and lacked adequate consideration. She gave me her opinion in writing for $350. She also said something else. She said, "If you have documentation supporting a claim that your work was consistently misrepresented or misattributed in a way that damaged your professional standing or compensation, that's potentially a different conversation. Do you have documentation?" I told her I had 3 years of it. She said, "Don't do anything yet, but don't lose any of it." I had a coffee separately with the commercial real estate broker who had told me twice that he'd put my name forward. His name was Jerome Latimore, and he had an office in the East Side neighborhood, 2 blocks from where my father's barber shop had been before my father retired the prior summer. Jerome had been sending his clients to Hartwell and Crane for years and had never been entirely comfortable with how the firm treated independent contract people. He knew who was doing the actual work. He asked smart questions. He listened to what I told him and he said, "When you're ready to hang a shingle, I've got 3 clients who need exactly what you do, and I don't think they care what letterhead it comes from." 3 clients in the same 30 days, before I had a business card printed. I called my mother the night I registered the LLC. She said, "What did you name it?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandfather's name was Gerald Deele. Your father's name is Gerald Deele. And you went with Marcus?" I said I wanted my own thing. She laughed. She said, "Good. Do your own thing. We'll be here on Saturday." Every Saturday my parents held dinner. They had held dinner every Saturday since before I was born. Same table, same kitchen, same routine. Whatever else was happening in the world, dinner was at 6. There was always enough food. There was always a seat. I was 28 days into my 30-day plan on a Thursday afternoon when I had the last conversation I would ever have with Howard Milbank as his employee. It happened because of a sentence. One sentence in an email to a new client prospect that Howard had forwarded to me for a quick read before it goes out. The email included the following line. Our contracts team, led by Senior Counsel Preston Vance, has managed over 40 major transactions in Connecticut commercial real estate over the past 6 years. 40 major transactions over 6 years. Preston Vance had been at the firm for 6 weeks. I walked down the hall to Howard's office. I knocked on the open door. He waved me in without looking up from his screen. Howard, I said, can I ask about the language in this email? He looked up. What about it? Senior Counsel Vance has been here 6 weeks. The 40 transactions over 6 years, that's the firm's track record. But it's attributed to his leadership. Howard looked at me, the way people look when they've been caught saying something they intended to say and are slightly annoyed at being made aware of it. Preston heads the contracts function going forward. The firm's track record is his track record by association. By association, I repeated. Is there an issue here, Marcus? I looked at him for a moment. He was wearing a very nice shirt, pale blue, good cotton, the kind of shirt that costs $200 and looks like it costs nothing because everything about it is effortless. He'd been wearing shirts like that my entire career here. I had been funding those shirts in part at $58,000 a year while doing $130,000 worth of work. No issue, I said. Just wanted to clarify. I walked back to my office. I wrote my resignation letter. Clean, professional, effective, 2 weeks from today. No grievances, no accusations, no emotional content whatsoever. 2 paragraphs. I thanked them for the opportunity, stated my final date, noted I would ensure all active project files were properly transitioned, and signed it. Marcus Deele, Contract Services Manager, with the date. Then I went back to finishing the last 2 documents in my queue with clean hands and full attention. Because that's what my father taught me. You finish the work. You do it right. The record belongs to you, not to them. 2 weeks later, I was done. I want to tell you about my last morning at Hartwell & Crane because it matters. I arrived at 8 a.m., which was my normal time. I went to my office, the one with no window and the heater that smelled like burning hair. And I finished packing the last of my personal items into a cardboard box. A coffee mug, a dictionary I'd had since college, a photograph of my parents on their 30th anniversary, a small framed print my mother had given me when I moved in that said simply, "Document everything," which I had hung above my desk and which I now realized was perhaps the single most relevant piece of decor in the building. At 9 o'clock, I went to Arthur's office. He was in. I knocked. He waved me in. He saw the box in my hand, and his expression moved through several registers. Confusion, understanding, something that might have been regret, and then the smooth rearrangement back into professional courtesy. Marcus, come in. I set the box down on the chair across from his desk. I placed a manila folder on his desk. What's this? He said. A summary of my project contributions over 5 years, I said. Dates, documents, deliverables, original file timestamps, client correspondence, where my work was referenced. I put it together for my own records and thought you should have a copy for yours. He opened the folder. His eyes moved down the first page. They slowed. He turned to the second page, the third. There were 14 pages. He looked up. I also want you to know, I said, keeping my voice exactly level, that I have had preliminary conversations with 2 potential clients. Conversations that I believe are permissible under the non-solicitation provisions of my employment agreement, as those individuals initiated contact with me rather than the reverse. I reviewed the agreement with an attorney. If Hartwell and Crane believes otherwise, I'd encourage you to have your counsel reach out to mine. Arthur closed the folder. He looked at me for a long moment with the careful expression of a man doing very rapid mental accounting. The non-compete as written, I added, is probably unenforceable in Connecticut. My attorney's opinion is in writing. A pause. Then Arthur said something I had not expected. He said, "You've been planning this for a while." "Not planning," I said. "Documenting. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. And I saw, for the first time in 5 years, something that might have been genuine respect, or maybe something adjacent to it, filtered through the recognition that the person in front of him had been quietly, methodically building the case against his comfortable arrangement for 3 years, and he had not noticed. "Is there anything we could have done to keep you?" he said. I thought about the parking garage. I thought about Preston Vance's $112,000 salary. I thought about the 40 transactions over 6 years being attributed to a man who had been in the building for 6 weeks. I thought about the dinner at Whitmore's. I thought about the letter with the $3,000 raise and Arthur's face of generous expectation. "Probably," I said. "A few years ago, maybe. Not now." I picked up my box. I said, "I'll make sure the project files are labeled clearly. Preston should be able to find everything." I walked out. I did not slam the door. I did not drop the microphone. I did not say anything I would regret. I simply walked down the hall, pressed the elevator button, rode it to the parking garage, put my box in the back of the 2009 Honda Civic, and drove to my father's barber shop, which he had retired from, but still visited twice a week, because he couldn't stand to stay away from the space. He was there when I arrived, sitting in his own chair, the one he'd stood behind for 31 years, reading a newspaper. He looked up when I walked in. "Done?" he said. "Done," I said. He folded the newspaper. "Your mother's making dinner Saturday. Bring whatever you want to tell us." I sat in the client chair. The same one I'd sat in my whole childhood. He asked me how I was feeling. I told him I felt clean. Like the moment after you've been carrying something heavy for a long time and you put it down and your arms are tired, but the tiredness is the right kind. The kind that comes from effort, not from being crushed. He nodded. He went back to his newspaper. That was enough. The first year of running your own shop is a specific kind of education that nobody can give you in a classroom or a conference room. It is the education of consequence, of understanding, with full clarity and no buffer, that everything now depends on you, and that the freedom of that is real, but so is the weight. I set up a home office in my apartment, folding desk, 2 monitors, a printer, and the same external hard drive I'd been keeping my documentation on for 3 years. First business purchase, a legal research subscription. Second, liability insurance. Third, a set of business cards that said Marcus Deele, contract specialist, in clean sans serif type, with my email and my phone number, and nothing else. No logo, no tagline, just the name and the contact. Jerome Latimore had been right about his 3 clients. 2 of them signed engagement letters with me within the first 6 weeks. One was a mid-size residential developer named Carlos, who needed help structuring a 12-unit condo conversion. The other was a small commercial landlord named Patricia Owens, who had been managing a strip mall with handshake lease agreements for years and needed everything formalized before she could refinance. Neither project was as large as what I'd been handling at Hartwell & Crane. Both projects were fully mine. My name on the engagement letter, my name in the client's phone under attorney, even though I always corrected them and said contract specialist, and my number to call. The third client came through 3 months later, Barry O'Say. I had expected the non-solicitation provision to keep Northgate off the table for 12 months. But Barry O'Say was meticulous. He had his own attorney review the provision and concluded that his reaching out to me, proactively, before my departure, positioned the engagement outside the non-solicitation window. I don't know whether that analysis was right or wrong as a strict legal matter. I know that Barry O'Say's attorney was comfortable with it, and that I chose not to test it. Barry became my 3rd client, and within 18 months, the anchor of my practice. The Northgate joint venture was followed by 2 additional acquisitions, a refinancing, and a ground lease negotiation for a mixed-use development in the north end of the county. My name was on every document. My name was the one Barry O'Say mentioned when his colleagues asked who did his contract work. By month 14, I had 6 active clients and a wait list. By month 18, I hired a part-time administrative coordinator, a woman named Denise who processed documents with the same quiet thoroughness my mother had applied to 26 years of county records work, and who had no patience for disorganization, which suited me exactly. By month 20, I moved out of the apartment and into a proper office. second floor of a converted Victorian on East Broad Street, 2 blocks from where my father's barber shop had stood. Real windows, no burning heater, a waiting area with 2 chairs and a table where I kept a bowl of mints, not because clients needed mints, but because I had spent 5 years in a building where the waiting area was a statement about who you were, and I wanted my waiting area to say, "You're expected, you're welcome, you matter here." My monthly revenue in year 1 averaged $9,400. In year 2, $17,200. By year 3, I was doing more in a quarter than I had made in a year at Hartwell and Crane. And my name was on every document. I did not pursue a legal claim against Hartwell and Crane. I want to be honest about why. My labor attorney had told me that I potentially had documentation supporting a case around misrepresentation of my role and suppression of my professional advancement. She was probably right. But I also did my own analysis, and the analysis told me a lawsuit would take 2 to 3 years, cost $40,000 to $80,000 in legal fees, produce uncertain outcomes, require my sustained attention and energy during the years I most needed to build something, and make me defined, professionally, publicly, by a conflict with people I had already left behind. I was not interested in being defined by them. I had spent 5 years being defined by them, or more precisely, by their refusal to define me at all. I wasn't going to spend 2 more years in that orbit. I filed my documentation, kept my records, and moved on. What happened to them is not something I orchestrated. I want to be precise about that. I didn't call their clients. I didn't make complaints. I didn't write anything public or say anything to anyone who wasn't directly asking about my own professional history. But 200 people attended the Northgate Deele meetings, the county development forums, the professional association events, where people in this industry talked about which firms did good work and which firms were coasting on the labor of people who never got credit for it. And Barry O'Say, who had watched me explain the equity waterfall provision from a chair against the wall, talked about it. Not maliciously, just honestly, in the way that people talk when someone asks them who they work with and why. What I heard through the slow and unorchestrated channels of a professional community where everyone eventually knows everything. Preston Vance lasted 14 months at Hartwell and Crane. The quality of the contract's work dropped measurably after I left. Barry O'Say completed the Northgate project with me and did not bring a second project to Hartwell and Crane. Howard Milbank took a consulting position with a law firm in Hartford. Arthur Crane III remained, but the portfolio contracted. The Meridian Ridge Capital relationship, the one I had written the pitch document for, ended after the second round of projects, when the quality and speed of document work no longer matched the client's expectations. I did not celebrate any of this. When I heard about the Meridian Ridge departure, I felt briefly something that I had to identify carefully before I reacted to it. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was something more like confirmation, the specific feeling of a hypothesis being validated that you had always known was correct, but had spent years being told to doubt. I called my father the evening I heard about it. Heard the Hartwell firm lost the Meridian Ridge account, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, how do you feel about that? I thought about it honestly. Like the work mattered, I said. Like it was always about the work, not the name above the door. He said, "Good. That's the right feeling. Now come to dinner Saturday." 8 months after I left Hartwell and Crane, a letter arrived at my office on East Broad Street. Not the apartment, the office, which meant someone had looked up where I worked. The return address was a street I didn't recognize at first. I opened it standing at Denise's desk. It was from Arthur Crane III. 3 paragraphs. Handwritten on personal stationery, not company letterhead. The handwriting was deliberate, slightly labored. The handwriting of a man who was choosing words carefully. He wrote that he had been thinking about the folder I had left on his desk. He said that he had gone back through 5 years of project files after I left, and that my summary had been accurate. Accurate and, in his words, more complete than I was prepared to see. He wrote that he was not writing to offer anything material or to propose any remediation. He was writing because he believed the situation had been unjust, and he had known it had been unjust at the time, and he had said nothing. He ended by writing, "I don't know what you've built since leaving, but I imagine it reflects who you actually were while you were here, which we did not permit ourselves to properly recognize. I regret that." I read it twice. I folded it and put it in the bottom drawer of my desk, behind the external hard drive. I didn't reply. Not that day, not that month. Maybe someday. I wasn't ready to decide whether the letter was sincere or strategic, whether Arthur was genuinely accounting for something or simply managing a narrative. I had gotten very good, over 5 years, at waiting for time to answer questions that clarity could not. What I did do that same evening was go to dinner at my parents' house on Pratt Avenue. The same table, the same yellow walls, the same mismatched chairs, and the chip in the corner from the cast iron skillet I'd dropped at 16. My mother had made meatloaf, which she only made when something important had happened, because meatloaf took time, and she reserved time for things that warranted it. I showed them the letter. My father read it slowly. My mother read it after him. They didn't say much. My father put the letter on the table and pushed it back toward me. "What are you going to do with it?" I said I didn't know yet. He nodded. "All right. Either way." He picked up the meatloaf and passed it. "How's the Osei project going?" And we talked about work. It is 2 years since I walked out of Hartwell and Crane with a cardboard box and a folder of documentation. Deele Contract Services has 9 clients. I have one full-time associate, a young woman named Priya, who just passed her paralegal certification and who drafts with the kind of clean, methodical attention I recognize from my own early years, and who I am very careful to credit every time, publicly and in writing, for the work she produces. Her name appears on every document she contributes to. I made that the policy before she started. She told me later it was the reason she took the job. I moved to a 2-bedroom apartment 6 months ago. Hardwood floors, a real kitchen, a view of the river that floods every spring. I still bring lunch from home. I still drive the 2009 Civic. I will buy a new car when the Civic gives me a reason to, and it keeps refusing to. My father retired his barbershop chair the year I left Hartwell and Crane. Bad knees, 31 years. He visits the shop twice a week and does 1 or 2 cuts, by appointment only, for the clients who've been coming since the 1990s and who he simply cannot turn away. He says it's just to keep his hand in. Everyone who knows him knows it's because he loves the work, and always has. My mother retired from the county records office last spring. They gave her a cake and a card signed by 40 people. At the party, 3 different county attorneys told her that she had caught legal errors in documents they had filed and quietly corrected them without making anyone feel foolish, and that they did not know how the office would function without that. She came home with the card and put it on the refrigerator next to a photo of me at my office door on East Broad Street. I still have dinner at the Pratt Avenue house every Saturday. Same table. The chair I sit in is a folding chair from the garage, the good kind, with a padded seat. There is no chandelier, no prefix menu, no string quartet warming up in the garden. My mother makes what she makes. My father tells the same 4 stories in different orders, depending on who's at the table. Jerome Latimore comes sometimes. Priya came last month and sat next to my mother and asked about the county records work and listened for an hour. Barry Osei has never come, but he sent a bottle of wine at the holidays with a note that said, "For the family that raised the person who understood the waterfall provision." My father put it on the highest shelf and has not opened it because he does not drink wine, but he will not move it either. The chairs don't match. The table has that chip in the corner. The overhead light flickers a little, and my father always says he'll fix it next week. There are no place cards, and no charger plates, and nobody is sitting next to the service entrance. Every person at this table chose to be here. Every person belongs. That is my table 1. It has been my table 1 since the first Saturday I could walk to it. I am not telling you this story to give you a blueprint. Your situation is different from mine. Your industry is different. Your timing is different. Your resources are different. Your tolerance is different. What I did worked for me because of specific conditions that may or may not apply to you. But I want to tell you the thing I wish someone had said to me at 24, sitting in that office with the burning heater, drafting documents that bore other people's names. The work belongs to you. Not legally necessarily. That depends on your contract and your jurisdiction and 100 other factors. But in the truest sense of ownership, the sense that matters when you are alone at 11 p.m. getting a clause right that will protect someone's $14 million deal, the work is yours. The judgment is yours. The 20 hours of research that produced a single paragraph is yours. The knowledge that you knew what you were doing when the people presenting your work did not, that is yours, and no one can misattribute it. Document everything. My mother told me this over a kitchen table in 1999, talking about county deed filings, and it is the single most durable professional advice I have ever received. Not because documentation gives you power over other people, but because documentation is the record of your own reality. And there will be people in your life who will try to convince you that your reality is not what you experienced. The documentation is how you stay clear. Know your worth. Not in the abstract sense of believe in yourself, which is advice that costs nothing and accomplishes the same. In the specific, quantified, market-researched sense. Know what people who do what you do are paid to do it. Know what the company is billing for the work you produce. Know the gap. Because the gap is not about your value. It never is. The gap is about what someone else believes they can sustainably take from you before you notice or before you act. When you know the gap, you can decide what to do about it, but you have to know it first. Live clean. This one is harder than it sounds. When you have been undervalued for years, the exit is an opportunity. An opportunity for rage, for public accounting, for the satisfaction of saying every true thing you have been holding back. I did not do that. Not because I didn't have the material for it. I had 3 years of documentation. But because I understood that the record would outlast any dramatic exit, and that the quality of my departure would itself become part of the record. I walked out clean, with the folder, with the documentation, with the dignity of a person who finished their work and said what needed to be said, without cruelty or performance. Arthur's letter came. It would not have come if I had burned things down on the way out. And finally, the table you build matters as much as the table you leave. I left a table where I was furniture. I built a table where every person who sits down has a name on the work they produce, a chair that was chosen for them, and the clear understanding that they got here because of what they know and what they do and who they are, not because of whose fraternity brother their father happened to be. Priya knows her work is hers. Denise knows her contributions are documented and credited. Barry Osei knows that when he asks a question, the person who built the answer is the person giving it, not someone against the wall with no title and a burning heater. That's the table I'm building. There's room. There always is when you're the one holding the chair. My name is Marcus Deele. I'm 34 years old. I grew up on Pratt Avenue, in a two-family house my father rented the bottom unit of for 22 years. My father cut hair for $22. My mother processed records for $31,000. They were not wealthy. They were not connected. They were not invited to Whitmore's for the $120 prefix. They sat at my table every Saturday and made sure there was always enough food and always a seat. For 6 years, I wrote contracts for men who wore the kind of suits that cost what my parents made in a month. I built deals that built buildings that are still standing in this county. And I did it under their names, not mine. Not anymore. I am Dave and Linda. I mean, Gerald and Claudette, Deele's son. And I have never been prouder of where I came from. That's my story. I want to hear yours. If you've ever had your name left off work you produced, type "My name belongs on it" in the comments. If you've ever sat in the chair against the wall while someone else presented your work, type "I was in that room" and I will read every one. And if someone in your life right now needs to hear that the work they do is theirs, that their name belongs on it, share this with them today. Because sometimes the only thing between a person and their table one is knowing that it exists and that they are allowed to sit down. Thank you for staying to the end. There's another story in the description. I'll see you there.